Hello, Wakefield, and this presentation will be focused on financial analysis concepts in healthcare. A couple of common trend and comparative analysis. Let's take a closer look at both of these. Trend analysis looks for trends and helps identify patterns. It is generally specific to your comparing information over multiple periods of time. A comparative analysis compares changes over a very specific period of time. As a manager, you can compare your own data, or you can compare it against a benchmark, such as a national standard set by organizations like MGMA. You can also compare your data against a specific competitor's data if you're interested. Both types of analysis are important tools for a manager to have in their toolkit for planning and decision-making purposes. Now, let's look at a specific case study. This is a comparative analysis to determine increases in patient volume. As you can see, the data in these tables shows patient volume broken down into specific visit types and compares this data over a 2-year period to identify growth. We can see in the first table that the established and post-op visit types consume the majority of patient visits at well over 65% both years. In the second table, we see the new patient visits increase the most at over 28%. This in turn helped increase the surgical volume to 22.5%. However, we notice the established and post-op visit type only increased 12.6%, making one wonder if the new patients did not return as established patients, or the post-op patients did not return to the office for follow-up care. As a manager, one should dive further into this data to determine if there is a problem or reason for the small increase in these two types of visits. In this case, if a trend analysis was done, it would look at each visit type month over month or year over year to see if there is a pattern of increased patient volume in a specific month relative to increased surgeries at a particular time of the year. This data would help a manager determine when would be a good time for a provider or staff to take their vacation. Next, we will look at forecasts. Looking at forecasting, there are 3 general areas to focus on: revenue, expenses, and staffing needs. In my opinion, I think of the operating revenue as the heartbeat of the budget. Estimating how much income you have the ability to potentially earn and add to your budget for the coming year can be, however, with the right data and tools, this can be done. A single year forecast is generally created. It can include assumptions when determining the expected revenue and will include areas such as utilization, patient mix, contractual allowance, trend analysis, and payer change. We will discuss these in more detail in a few minutes. Forecasting expenses helps a manager to determine what their budget will be spent on in the coming year, and it helps determine if they can make any improvements such as remodeling, purchasing new office or medical equipment, etc. Generally, however, the operating expenses do not include labor costs. They do, however, include items such as supplies, contract services, professional fees, rents or leases, utilities, and marketing. Next, we look at forecasting staffing needs. Forecasting your staffing will assist a manager in addressing staffing expenses such as provider versus non-provider salaries and wages, staff benefits, overtime, and PTO. It will help a manager determine the provider to non-provider ratio. A manager can also look at the market to see if there is a high or low unemployment rate and how that might play into their need for additional staffing should the need arise. Spending time on creating a master plan will allow a manager to determine the need for increased staff on some days versus other days, or earlier or later start times for specific staff members. Let's take another look at our case study. In this graph, we see the prior year. This represents what the actual revenue, expenses, and profit were, not what was budgeted for the year. The current year value is what the budget is for the current year. and not what the actual revenue, expenses, and profit have been to date thus far. Taking the information from both of these years into consideration, a manager can forecast a budget for the coming year by looking at what the prior year actual was and what the current year budget was set at compared to what the current year actual is. One can make an informed estimate as to what they believe the revenue, expenses, and net profit might look like for the coming year. That is the budget. The challenges of creating a forecast or making a budget are not truly knowing what the patient volume or payer mix will be when determining the amount of revenue your office will bring in. An increase or decrease in volume can affect supplies expenses as well. An increase in volume can result in an increase in requiring more medical supplies, etc. Likewise, an increase in volume can determine an increase in the staffing needs, which in turn can increase your labor costs. These can be seen as ripple effects and need to be considered when forecasting a budget. Next, we turn our attention to assumptions, which I briefly mentioned a few minutes ago. First, we will look at utilization. This is how our clinic time is utilized in the best possible manner. We can look at patterns from our trend analysis to see that our new patient visits have increased. So we have a need to create additional visit times for new patients every clinic day. In order to accomplish this, we will have to create shorter office visits or increase our clinic time to accommodate the increased volume. Second, we will look at the patient mix. Another way of stating this, one that I am more personally familiar with, is looking at the payer mix, such as commercial payers, Medicare, Medicaid, and self-pay. In addition, we can look at the age of our patients to see if there's a trend on older patients falling and possibly breaking their hands, or if we are seeing an increase in Medicaid or self-pay patients who may or may not have the ability to pay their bills. Third is the contractual allowance. This is the difference between the gross charge sent to the payer or insurance carrier by our office and the allowed or net charge that is recorded for each visit. The contractual allowance is always stated in a dollar amount and will assist in forecasting revenue for the coming year. Fourth is the trend analysis. This allows a manager to compare data, including month over month or year over year, to better determine busy times or slower times of the year. The final assumption is payer change. This takes into account potential regulatory change upcoming year. While a trend analysis is usually retrospective, a payer change is prospective, creating some angst due to how it might actually play out. It is the world of the unknown and is difficult to determine when it is new. Looking once again at our case study, we will look at the patient or payer mix, and you can see how improving growth of commercial payers would be beneficial. Most commercial insurances have a larger contractual allowance when compared to Medicare, Medicaid, or self-pay patients. By this medical office increasing the patient mix to include more commercial payers and decreasing Medicaid, there would be an increase in the overall operating revenue. Remember, this is an assumption, and it is sometimes hard to control what insurance a patient has. That is why it is important to ask these types of questions when scheduling appointments. You can put a limit on how many Medicare, Medicaid, or self-pay patient visit types are allowed during a day, week, or month to control this. However, if it is a true emergency, you should always see a patient despite their ability to pay. That is, after all, why most of us are in the medical field. Finally, we turn our attention to common sizing. Common sizing is another method of looking at or comparing information. It allows multiple years to be compared side by side. Common sizing is generally changes dollar values into percentages. A vertical analysis is a great way to analyze information. It allows different components of a financial statement to be compared and determine how they relate to a specific figure on the financial statement. A vertical analysis is fairly easy to read when comparing percentages rather than dollar values. A horizontal analysis allows managers to gain insight into changes from a previous year, including any increases or decreases in a specific line item. This comparison allows changes, such as increases, to be viewed in dollar amounts as well as percentages. Looking back at our case study, this spreadsheet compares revenue and expenses year over year in a vertical analysis. You can see how the Medicaid value has not changed, but the self-pay decreased dramatically from 12 to 4%. In addition, the other revenue, most likely commercial payers, slightly increased. Comparing the expenses between the 2 years, it looks fairly stable and would be easy to make an assumption or forecast for the coming year. A horizontal analysis of this data would have compared year 1 to year 2 to see how much increase there was overall and what the percentage of increase was for each line item specifically. For example, it would look to see what the percentage of increase was for Medicare patients. In all we do, it is important to remember that we should look at this with a biblical perspective. We must remember that we are nothing and have nothing without the will of our Heavenly Father, and we must be wise with that, with what is bestowed upon us for our care. Proverbs 21:5 states, "The plans of the diligent lead surely to abundance, but everyone who is hasty comes only to poverty." It is important to remember that while the healthcare has become a business, and as managers we are accountable for specific amounts of money, both income and expenses, we are here to care for patients. We must carefully plan and manage those finances to the best of our ability, using all of the tools and resources available to us. That includes analysis such as those we have discussed today. Thank you for spending time with me today. God bless.